I just want to give you a little bit of the history of some of the thinking behind metaphors of movement and the ideas that led to the model as it is today. Now, metaphors of movement has a particular problem, predominantly the word metaphor. This is a particular problem for me, but I tell you why. Those who know about metaphors think they know what metaphors of movement will be, because they'll go, oh, metaphors, aha, that's clean language. Well, clean language does metaphors, but it's not the only use of metaphors. Or they'll say, metaphors. Oh, yes, I use metaphors in my hypnotherapy practice. I use unconscious metaphor storytelling with my clients. Well, telling a story to the client is a use or application of a metaphor, I guess, but that's not metaphors of movement. Or they'll say, oh, yes, I know about the mythical journey, the hero's journey, and I know about using storytelling. It's not metaphors of movement, that's something else. So the difficulty I have with metaphors of movement is the word metaphor conjures up something that people already with experience in metaphors think it is. To those who have never got any experience with metaphors whatsoever, it sounds ridiculous. Metaphors. Metaphors of movement. So what? It's a metaphor. What's a metaphor? Who cares? So there's a particular problem in that whilst I understand the importance of metaphor in understanding how people think and reason, people outside of the training of metaphors won't necessarily understand that. And basically it sounds lame. The word metaphor sounds lame. So I thought it's about time to put a video out to give you some of the stuff that I was doing that led to the stuff that I'm doing today. Now, there's all sorts of people along the way that gave me a huge amount of input, to which I'm eternally grateful for. I'm not going to attempt to name check everybody, but those who helped, you know who you are. This is more about the ideas rather than the people, if that makes sense. So here's what I was doing. In workshops, I was doing therapy workshops, and I started asking some pretty simple questions. Here was one of the first questions I asked the group. If you look back upon your life in shame, which shoulder do you look over? Do you look back over the left shoulder or the right shoulder? Now, of course, I'm assuming they look back on their life in shame, but you know the lyric from the song, if I look back upon my life with a sense of shame. Or some people look back on their lives with a sense of regret. But to look back, looking back, if you were to look back, which way do you look? And so I started to ask people about this, that if they had something in the past they looked back upon with shame or regret or whatever other emotion, which way were they looking, which shoulder? And if they looked over their left shoulder, and that would evoke the sense, that would be correct. If they kept the same representation, what would be different if they looked over the right shoulder, and how would that change? And people started noticing that it was easier to do it one way more than the other. So I thought, okay, there seems to be a connection physiologically with the expressions that people use. Then I started asking different questions, like, if you grasp a hold of a new idea, not everyone does, of course, not everyone grasps it. This is obviously very much in the kinesthetic. But if you grasp a hold of a new idea, or grasp a hold of a good idea, how do you grasp it? So do you grasp it with the left hand, or the right hand, or both hands? How are you grasping? And I got people to act that out. So show me what it's like when you grasp a hold of a new idea. What's the physiology of the expression? Now, what started to emerge was kind of interesting. When people got the physiology correct, they felt kind of in the body, they felt that concept of grasping hold of a new idea, looking back with a sense of shame. When the physiology matched exactly the mental representation, they felt it. So we had sort of this mind-body connection thing going on. Then I got people to do things like put your best foot forward. When you put your best foot forward, which foot is it? Is it the left foot or the right foot that you put forward? Now, for most people, it's the right foot, because that would be the right foot. The left foot isn't wrong, it's just not right. Now, not for everybody. Now, when you put your best foot forward, how do you put it forward? What is the physiology that goes with putting your best foot forward? And when the foot goes forward, how far does it go? How does it make contact with the ground? So that was another one we looked at. People taking the appropriate steps was another one. as opposed to taking the wrong steps. And in training, of course, we want people to take the appropriate steps. Some people think of the right steps to take. Now, if you think about the right steps, is that going off to the left or to the right or forwards? For a lot of people, it veers off to the right because there's a bias, there's a linguistic bias built in with the left and right. Now, I started thinking, hang about. We think about the stuff that we have left. We've also thought about the stuff that's right for us. There's what we look forward to and what we would go back to. So we have four directions, and there's a bias linguistically in English. All of the things that you have left, the things that are right, what you look forward to, what's behind all this, or what you would go back to. Then something weird happened. I didn't really have all the bits that I have now, but I started noticing some clients would say things like, I don't know what's right. I don't know the right thing. And when I'd explore the representation, there was always a blank. It was an abyss, a void. It was black. There was nothing there. Some people say there's nothing left for me. Nothing left. And when we explored what was left in the very haphazard, because I didn't really have the metaphors that I have now, we explored what was left, there's nothing there because there's nothing left for them. Some people, they don't want to go back to where they came from. They don't want to go back to what came before. And when I started to explore what was behind, they would often get quite emotional or defensive because they don't want to go back. They've put it behind them. They don't want to even look at it now. It's behind them. Some people say they have nothing to look forward to. There was nothing in front either. So these were some of the things that started to piece together. And I thought, ooh, this seems to be reflecting on how people then construct their metaphors. So then we were doing all sorts of exercises and trial groups with different workshops. And I was getting people to act out all of these different metaphors physiologically. So if the person, say, their hands are tied, it was very easy for people to tell you the effect of having the hands tied. They can't take any action. They can't get hold of anything new. They completely, well, their hands are tied. And people could go into the effect, the result, the consequence of having their hands tied, metaphorically speaking. But I started then looking at what's doing the tying. So how are they tied? What is that? And how did that come about? So we go into the metaphor of the expression, but we tend to look at the other side. Most people seem to focus on the effect. I started looking on more the causation. And the more that we kind of explored this, the more certain patterns became apparent. And there was a lot of gaps, there were a lot of holes in the things that we were seeing. And that's where I then started asking more sort of detailed questions. And the model of metaphors of movement started to emerge. Here was one of the stories I used to tell at the time. And for me, it epitomized what I was seeing in so much NLP work and psychotherapy and psychiatry and all the rest. And the story I used to tell was, imagine there's a remote island and there's a primitive tribe on the island. And the island is volcanic. And today, the volcano god is very, very angry. And all the people know this because the ground is shaking, there's smoke and fire and signs of anger. And in order to appease the volcano, the people go and kill a few chickens, sacrifice a few goats, and do a whoopee-whoopee dance in the way that their ancestors had taught them to do to appease the volcano god. But still, the volcano god was angry. So they kill off some more livestock and maybe a few of each other, but still the volcano god is angry. And then something miraculous occurs. An NLP practitioner arrives on the island. And the NLP practitioner tells all of the islanders, ladies and gentlemen, please, you have to understand that this is not real, the map is not the territory, and that you can change your response set to the reality that you face. So please, ladies and gentlemen, put your feet flat on the floor and close your eyes and take a deep breath. And I want you to make the big picture of the scary volcano god smaller and further away. Make it smaller and further away, smaller and further away. Now take a deep breath and open your eyes. And all the people were killed by the volcano god. Because the difficulty is that we can try and perfect the map, but in so many schools of NLP that I'm seeing, and brief therapy generally, the territory is largely being forgotten. And that, for want of a better word, what is happening is practitioners and therapists are facilitating kinesthetic denial. Take the tax return, take the big, scary, overwhelming picture of the tax return that you haven't yet done, that's really bothering you and keeping you awake at night, and swish it away, swish it away, swish it away, so therefore you don't get bothered by the big, horrible picture anymore. Brilliant. You've just created kinesthetic denial to the problem, but that doesn't make the problem any different. Nor does it necessarily change the strategy, your behavior, by how you deal with the particular problem. All it does is just make you feel indifferent. And the more I was observing this, the more I was talking to a lot of the inner circle NLP practitioners, people who've been doing way too much of this kind of stuff, who tended to have a certain attitude, and it didn't seem to me to be a particularly healthy one. The overall driver was I'm so happy, and I don't give a fuck about problems in the world. I never say that I have a problem. I never say I'm fine, because that means fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and God knows what else. Apparently, they always have to go, I'm great, I'm amazing, I'm fine, I'm fantastic. They're idiots. And that was the thing that I was observing, is that so many people, for all of their claims of success, they were financially not doing very well. In fact, most of them were in debt, living off credit cards, bouncing around. They weren't maintaining steady relationships. Their relationships with the other inner circle NLPers did not seem healthy. I mean, sitting in the office with people didn't really show me that people were talking nicely about the other people. In fact, they were pretty horrible to each other, about each other. There was just something going on here that didn't seem to be personal development. There just seemed to be an awful lot of denial that was being created. And I wondered if, in fact, so many of the processes and practices that practitioners are doing these days are not about changing the behavior. They're about changing the representation of reality, so that reality gets so distorted, these people literally live in a different reality. But they don't necessarily function so well outside of those protective cult-like groups. Then, in a presentation that I was doing over in the States, I was working with a guy who was essentially, his problem was he felt like he was bashing his head against a brick wall. And he wanted to move forward, but it was always like there was something in his way, and he felt like he was bashing his head against a brick wall. Now, one of the people in the group, who was an NLP trainer, said to me, well, why don't you just swish the brick wall away so he doesn't experience the brick wall anymore? And I thought about this, and suddenly something fell into place for me. You see, if we get rid of the brick wall, his behavior remains completely unchanged. His behavior is to bash his head against brick walls. And his solution, or the suggested solution, is to remove the brick wall. That doesn't seem to be something that teaches a flexibility. What that seems to be is we turn the guy into some kind of bulldozer. You've met this guy. I won't let anything stand in my way. I'm always going for a breakthrough, and nothing stands in my way. I'm unstoppable. Yeah, great. I've met those people. And I tell you, I get out of their way as well, because sooner or later they're going to run into something and they're going to crash, and they won't understand what happened. And there's even courses that will teach you to be unstoppable and let nothing get in your way. And they're always teaching you a breakthrough. And they teach you to break through boards and arrow breaks and firewalks. Nothing will stop you. Apart from reality, that might stop you. Get a refund, I think, for a lot of you people. Now, it becomes problematic because if we're getting the brick wall to change its properties, the metaphorical brick wall, his behavior doesn't change. So every time now he comes up against something that is an obstruction to him, he'll just go into a state of denial by swishing it away and reorientating his thought processes as though it's not there. But how about creating an alternative, either helping him overcome the obstacle, go around the obstacle, get through it, maybe not, change direction and go somewhere else? Or some people like to undermine these things and get to the bottom of them. So we have these different strategies and patterns. But in so many of the processes, that wasn't what people were doing. It's simply take the picture of the thing you don't like and change it. But none of it is changing your approach to how you deal with the situation. So these were some of the thinking behind, some of the thoughts behind what I was doing with the metaphors work. Now, there's other metaphors models. Now, some of them, if you look at, say, the typical Ericksonian metaphor storytelling, I would hope, it's not my experience, but I would hope that most therapists who are telling a story to their client, the story contains enough variation in terms of alternative behaviors to be applied to the problem, that they open up alternative behaviors for the client to follow. Simply reframing the problem, I don't think is sufficient. I don't think just calling anxiety excitement with a different name is of any use whatsoever to anybody, apart from scoring a point. But I do think that getting people to behave differently in relation to the problems that they have starts to create a significant change. And that was essentially how all this started. Then what it led to, of course, were the observations of recurring patterns. There are so many patterns that come out again and again and again that I was able to start to group different metaphors. For example, container metaphors. Anyone that's read George Lakoff's book, Metaphors We Live By, will be familiar with the concept of a container metaphor. A container metaphor is a digital shift. Either you're in it or you're out of it. It tends to be a lifelong issue. That even though it's been there for a very, very long time, the switch that can occur is digital. So you can have a lifelong issue that if it's structured as a container metaphor, you can create a one-session fix. And that's quite dramatic. And that's one of the things I teach on the Metaphors of Movement workshop. That contrasts with what I call the hurts, emotional injury metaphors. Emotional injury metaphors are feelings like I've been stabbed in the back. I'm crushed, I'm suffocated, I feel like I'm run down, I'm run over. I'm cut up, I'm torn apart, my heart's been ripped out, my guts have been ripped out. That's not digital. If I've got a broken heart, there's some recovery time needed. If I've been stabbed in the back, even though if I feel you've stabbed me in the back, and you apologize and make it all fine, that doesn't necessarily make my heart hurt go away. Because the hurt will persist, because healing time is required. Now that's very, very different to a container metaphor where a person's either in it or they're out of it. So what we start to see are some profound differences in how people organize different information. Think about this. A guy at one workshop, he told me he suffered heartbreak 20 years before. So the love of his life basically stole his heart. Nearly killed him emotionally. His life ended that day. He felt as though his life was over. And for 20 years since, he'd been living as a heartless man. And all of this made perfect sense to him now in the context of this. Now, that's not the same as a container. Now, there's also restraints, the things that hold you back, the things that stop you by restraint, which are very different to the obstacles, the things that block you, that you can't get through. You have to go around them, get over them, or whatever else. And there's others, there's lots of others. Now, with these, of course, there's different strategies. So, for example, if I've got an obstacle in my path that blocks my way, waiting to heal won't help. If I've got a broken heart, and that's so a physical injury metaphor, a breakthrough, which relates to an obstacle, isn't going to help. If I feel something holds me back, teaching me to deal with the pitfalls of my business or whatever the problem is, isn't going to help. So what we start to do is have very, very specific design to deal with very specific problems. What I tend to see is therapists and practitioners using a catch-all metaphorical structure, and they apply that to all the problems. For example, tapping. So we look at the tapping work that people do, whether it's thought field therapy, EFT, or any of the derivatives that came off that. they tend to use plumbing metaphors. They talk about energy flows. They talk about blockages in these magical tubes they call meridians, and they use taps to clear the blockage and get everything flowing again. But if I come to you with a broken heart, or a stab in the back, or something holds me back, or something blocks my path, none of those things fit the overriding metaphor of plumbing. So then to apply a plumbing metaphor to me, you're not going to get such a great result. Now, magically, if I have plumbing as my metaphor, as a therapist, sooner or later, a client is going to come and see me who has an identical metaphor structure. So the clients may come to see me, the tapping therapist, and say, I feel that I'm just blocked inside and that my energy doesn't flow. Now, that's the client that will probably get a magical result from that particular therapist. And that's the one that therapist then boasts about on Facebook later. Some people are always looking for a breakthrough. They advertise breakthrough sessions. They'll teach you how to deal with the obstacles that block your path to success. So this is very much about moving in a certain direction and clearing obstacles. But if I feel like something holds me back, a breakthrough may not be very effective. A breakout might be better, but a breakthrough may not actually help me. Similarly, if I feel like I'm stabbed in the back or I'm feeling suffocated in a relationship, a breakthrough won't work, nor will tapping. So labouring the point here, the metaphors of movement stuff is not about keeping it clean. That's the one thing we absolutely don't do. It's about hearing the structure of the problem and then designing an exact intervention to absolutely 100% fit the structure of the problem. Here's what happens. The results are amazing. I've got to tell you that. It sounds like a boast. It is. That's why it sounds like one. But the truth is, the results have been absolutely amazing. But there is something interesting that happens in the one-to-one work and to a degree in the client sessions, in the group work. It doesn't create the kinesthetic change that most people associate with effective therapy. You see, I can do a nice hypnotic trance, tell you some nice stories, wake you up, give you a nice cup of tea, then take your money and send you out, and you'll feel all lovely and relaxed and feel nice. Especially if I've used a soothing voice and I've got whale music in the background and I've got some crystals around the place and some lovely incense or potpourri. Those things will change your state. What we're having with the metaphors of movement work is that lovely, warm, fuzzy change of state isn't necessarily happening. What is often happening is the exact opposite. And we're having some people go, ah, because we're hitting buttons, using a metaphor, or we're getting into material that normally is just kind of, we'll have a bit of denial for that one, thank you very much, would be the normal approach. So the results initially, if we're measuring things kinesthetically, don't look that great. Long term, the results are absolutely extraordinary. And what's interesting is it seems that the more emotional stuff we get into and people experience the full range of emotions, the better the results are. When all we're doing is calming the person down, and we're putting them into a nice, soft, lovely state of mind where it's all lovely and dreamy, and we're just changing a state, that does absolutely nothing for how they deal with the problem. It just makes them feel better. Kinesthetic denial. So what we're doing is we're getting to much, much deeper change. Anyway, I think I'll probably talked enough for this one video. So if you want to know more about metaphors of movement and the ongoing projects that we're doing, go to the Metaphors of Movement website, which is all the W's, metaphorsofmovement.com. Very easy to remember. There's workshops now. I'm teaching this material everywhere. Let's go through. We've got UK, several locations in the UK, USA, Holland, throughout India, Israel, Japan. There's probably loads of others that I've missed. They're all listed on the Metaphors of Movement website. Lots of projects ongoing at the moment, some research work that we're doing, as well as some creative outlets. And there's lots of stuff scheduled for 2015. That's it. I'm going to sign off now. So go to the website. I'll see you there. Well, I won't, but you know what I mean.